All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest ALTA Insights webinar. I'm Jeremy Yowie, Alta's Vice President of Communications, and today we've got a great presentation designed to help you identify phishing email. As you may have seen in our marketing, employees continue to be one of the weakest links when it comes to cybersecurity. And according to reports, 9 out of 10 data breach incidents were caused by employee mistakes. And so hopefully, you'll glean some great information from our experts and some of the insight that they'll offer, and hopefully your company can avoid some of these costly mistakes and not fall for phishing scams. Before starting, I do have the typical housekeeping items to go over. Today's webinar is being recorded. You'll get an email with a link to the recording tomorrow. You can always access all of our webinar recordings at alta.org/webinars. You can get a copy of the presentation now in the handouts section in the Go to Webinar window pane. In your email tomorrow, you also have a link to download a PDF of the presentation as well. If at any time you have a question or a comment, submit them through the questions box. We'll hold some time at the end for a Q&A. I need to thank Closing Lock for sponsoring today's webinar. And before introducing today's speakers, we have a short message from Closing Lock. Okay, all right, thank you, Closing Lock. Very timely message, as often the phishing can kind of dovetail right into some of the wire fraud here. Give me just a sec, I got to move some things around here, make sure I'm sharing the presentation again. All right. All right, with that, let me introduce today's speakers. Joining us today, we're fortunate to have Trent Miller on. Trent is CEO of Cloud9. He's an IT professional with years of experience and a unique perspective on the tech industry. Also participating today is Dickon Newman. Dickon is Cloud9's information system security officer. I almost forgot the system part in there. Cloud9 provides remote and on-site computer support and IT solutions for a variety of industries, including the title and settlement industries. Trent, before I turn the presentation over to you, have a quick poll question we wanted to ask everyone. Wanted to see if people on the call have a solution already in place to help identify phishing email. We're collecting responses here. All right, looks like about 90% are saying yes, they do. About 10% no. So little gauge on what people have out there. Trent, I will turn it over to you and we can get into the presentation.
Better than I expected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Me too. So do you have the presentation? Because I do not see the presentation for me.
Not okay. There we go.
There we go. All right.
Thank you for letting me know it's not there. So.
Okay. Well, I was thinking, do other people see it? I don't, or maybe. Anyways, so so I guess we're just gonna kind of, it's a very high level overview of kind of, what phishing is, kind of what to look for, and then how to handle it, and maybe what you can do to kind of prevent it down the line. So what is phishing? I mean, I guess you'd say it's really exactly what it's named as. So phishing, it's like, throw the hook out, reel back some information. So it's about, trying to fish for information. And, there's really two, I guess you could say, security really falls into two realms. There's the technical security, I call it, that's the tools, like your anti-malware software and your email security filtering. And then there's the human element, right? So, and really over the years, if you really look at how hackers are operating now, you'll like brute force attacks where they break into a system, through some technical means. Those are just not that common. So what they found is that, moving to the human route is much more effective. So, phishing is probably the least effort, highest payoff method there is right now to get into a company's systems. And it's through their employees, and a lot of times through their CEOs, CFOs, especially the CFOs who really control the financial kings to the kingdom. They're really often targets for this. But what's interesting is that email, when you think about it, it doesn't require a brute force attack to get into your systems, right? We all have email, and email is literally essentially boom, right into your network, right into your systems. I mean, it's there. Everybody has email, and so it's a very easy way for them to get to you. Phishing is a form of social engineering, so it's really basing its effectiveness on human nature, and really, how quickly we all are to not read a full email, to click on whatever's in that email, to say yes to whatever pops up. I know the title industry in particular has been kind of, I guess you'd say, you guys will probably get a little bit more information about phishing than a lot of other industries because it's so prevalent in your industry. I mean, you guys have a lot of money that flows through you, and you also love to move quickly. I know this industry is all about speed, and so this is why you guys are such a target for it, and why you guys get hit with it so much. But obviously it's really looking for that human element, right? Somebody, it's going to look like from somebody it's going to have a call to action, click this, do this, purchase this, open this, and it's really counting on you to do that quickly. And so one of the things I'd say, just right off the bat, thinking of your industry is, and I know that we talk about this actually because I'm in the cybersecurity board at Alta, is that we talk about this often, that it'd be really good, we really got to get this idea from the title industry that speed is everything. Some of these items we have to, around phishing in particular, you really want to understand what's in the email before you just click. But what's the purpose here? The purpose is, they're trying to infect your system, which will usually establish what we call a persistent foothold. So if there's an executable file that you've clicked on, it will probably look like it did nothing, but actually installed a persistent foothold on your machine. What that does is that allows the hacker to gain access to your system later, to gather keystrokes, to see what you're doing whenever they want to. It's really a full-on do whatever they want with your system, and they use that to gather information for a later attack. So most of this stuff, by the way, is about gathering information for a larger attack later. So they're either doing it through an executable where they're establishing a persistent foothold. That's one way they're trying to get information, or they're just gathering your credentials, your username and password. That many people utilize the same username and password across all their systems, or many of their systems. And we see this even in I've seen it in the IT industry, and I'll just give you an example. It's a real example from 2 weeks ago. We had a potential customer, I guess you'd say, call us up, and their IT director had ransomware their entire company. So it's 200 some machines, meaning that the hackers had used his credentials, which they had gathered through phishing, which happened to be the same credentials to administrate all their systems. It was the same credentials to their backups. And so they encrypted everything, all their systems, all their backups, and the ransom was 900K. So that's a real life example of how using the same credentials across everything, that's really one of the number one things to really avoid, in general, to avoid a phishing attack being successful. Because if you're using a different set of credentials for every system, then then the only damage they can really do is the credentials they gather during that first phish. So, you know, one of the best ways to kind of, you know, that's why I'm always when people tell me what's one security tool that everybody should have, a password manager. I actually really think that everybody should have that. I mean, before I had a password manager, I was guilty of the same username and password across everything, just like everybody is. But utilizing the password manager, you know, every site system that we utilize now has a different password. So kind of going on a little bit from that, just I want to kind of
jump
go
in
ahead.
there, Trent.
Yeah, sure.
We're responding to approximately 5 to 6 incidents a week. So speaking anecdotally, most of those attacks and incidents that we're reviewing and investigating originated from phishing attempts.
Yeah, for sure. Almost all, right?
Yeah.
I would say it's nearly 100%. Yeah.
Next slide.
Yeah, thank you.
There we go.
I was like, next slide. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So just to go a little bit about how we, you know, what are some of so just to kind of go through a method to identify phishing messages. You can Google this. This is a very popular method. You'll hear this method talked about a lot, called the SLAM method. And really it's an acronym for four words, you know, sender, link, attachments, and message. And it's really just 4, I guess you'd say, things that you should check in every email. And the first is the sender, which makes sense. You know, is it somebody that you know? Is it coming from the actual email address? You've all seen the faked, where they put the name there, but it's really coming from a Gmail. It's like your friend's email. It's your friend's name, but it's a Gmail address or whatever. So check the sender. Links. You know, it says it's a UPS email. You know, if you look through the email and you hover over the link, is that going to a UPS site? You know, actually ups.com, or is it just some random URL? A random URL is definitely almost assuredly a phishing email. Attachments, this is a bit harder because I know in your industry you get a lot of attachments, but these are, as I talked about, these are a vector for those persistent footholds. And you know, where there's some type of executable that will install basically like a permanent malware. Now here's the bad part. There's a lot of anti-malware, a lot of the endpoint solutions that are out there, they don't catch this as often as you'd think. So it's I don't know, I'd almost say it's like 30% catch this during the installation. It's not high, at least not what I've seen. So you know, attachments are a bit, you know, I'd say, you know, I would, except for in your industry, you almost you're going to get attached. So I don't have a choice to say you shouldn't click on any attachments. But point being is that you should review the attachments, make sure it's coming from somebody that you trust. You know, look for, you know, a lot of times they'll try to obscure that it's they'll try to change the file name and make it look like it's just a document when really it's some type of VBA script or executable or something else. That's a little bit harder to detect for most people, but another, you know, if the attachment involves, you know, invoices or package tracking or payment confirmations, that's another little kind of red flag a lot of times. But attachments, you know, they are something to watch out for. They're the ones that are going to contain the actual malware package. Messages. So, you know, read the message, the body of the email. Does it have typos? Does it sound like it's from a native English speaker? You know, you know, a lot of hackers are you know, foreign nationals, so they're not going to speak English that well, especially write English. Although that's getting better with AI, so they are a lot of times using AI to generate this, and it looks and sounds better than it used to. So that's not as good as it used to be as a way to detect things. So next slide. So I'm going to kind of go through just a couple examples of phishing using that SLAM method. Now these are I would say these are very easy to detect. So you guys have, I'm sure, seen less, you know, I'm sure you've seen better examples of phishing in some ways, some harder to detect. Maybe we should have thrown some of those in there, but I'll just go through some of the easy ones to highlight the SLAM method. So if we're looking at, you know, just, you know, from the sender point, this is an odd sender, right? Some user, nobody would actually have that as their name. then you get down into the actual body of this. There's a specific call to action. Do this within 24 hours or your account will be suspended. So once you do something quickly, it's all about that quick and speed. Hopefully you'll just click stuff. You'll see there's some typos. There's some space there that shouldn't be there in the message. And then the link, query, it's supposed to be from this memphis.edu, but yet if you hover over the link, it's going to some random Weebly site. So that clearly is another very big red flag. And lastly, there's the signature here. I mean, that's also kind of goofy. Just the IT help desk. Next slide. Just go through a couple of different examples. This is a very, so as we talked about, any emails that talk about invoices or payments, I think those are suspect by default, especially if they're not coming from somebody you normally deal with. I get these. I'm the CEO of Cloud9, so I get a lot of these from different pay stuff all the time. Anyways, looks like it's from some type of payment platform or something. You have, again, a call to action. Your account's been restricted. They want you to download this file and update your login information. Well, first of all, I know that when I update my login information with most companies, it's a link, not a file. So, so that file is a little suspicious, some random HTML file. And then this signature, who would have a copyright symbol in the signature like that? So this is all bad all around. All right, next slide. And then lastly, this one kind of has the attachment in it, or a goofy attachment, right? So we've all had, it's trying to say there's this, you need to read this PDF, this item that's shared with you. That's, first of all, that's a very odd PDF name. So just by default, that's pretty off. It supposedly came from Esther Glassick, but it's a Gmail Drive share account. But then you go down here and you'll see it's Easter Glassick at San Miguel School. So it says they've shared it with you from San Miguel School. So why did it come from Google, right? Why did, instead of this email address, to the San Miguel School's email address? So there's a little discontinued, congruency right there. There's a problem with that. And then you also get that down below. It says sincerely Gene Malaeus, which that's clearly not Easter Glassick. So there's a lot of big glaring things in this one. There's a lot of inconsistencies across this whole thing, from the Google to the San Miguel Schools to not having the name right down below. So those are just like 3 very simple examples of phishing emails and how to use that kind of SLAM method to look at the sender, the message, the links, look for consistencies, and that type of thing. So what do you do? Next slide. So, what to do if you think you have a phishing email. You think you have one, you haven't clicked on anything yet. If you have, so I would say if you have a MSP, or you have, which is managed service provider, or an internal IT department, I think you should send it to them to have them review the email. I know that we're reviewing tons of emails every week here at Cloud9. Our clients are always sending us emails to review, I'd rather have them do it than click on it. So send them to us and we'll take a look. And even though we're using, all of our clients have an email security platform that we provide for them, that they don't catch everything at all. So, you get like, I don't know the percentage that still get through, but there's still a fair amount. I try to compare phishing emails to, standing in front of a firing range. I know that sounds like a strange comparison, but if you put on a lot of people think like, why am I getting this phishing email even though we've got all these security tools? And I will say, if you put a bulletproof vest on, walk in front of a firing squad, you're still gonna, a bullet's still gonna get through and probably kill you. So it's the same analogy here. It's just there's so much coming at you that all these email security platforms, that they can only do so much. They're filtering out the majority of it, but there's still going to be some that get through. So this is why, you can't rely on tools to save you from this. So some other things here, if you think the links might be bogus, go to the original vendor or customer's website, check to see if these are going to a legitimate place. Don't click on the links, but just see, hover over them, see if that goes to a legitimate site. Same with phone numbers. A lot of times phone numbers are bogus in the emails. Find the company online, call them directly, see if the number's a good number or not, see if it's a legitimate company. You know, do not, you know, otherwise don't click or engage with the email or the call to action, right? If you're unsure, take your time. Don't take your time and not engage until you can actually get it reviewed with somebody who really knows, you know, if you're unsure, who really knows what they're doing with your IT department in particular. But it's better to delay than to you know, engage in this and then have to fix it later. So nothing else. If you're pretty sure it's a bad email, just delete it. All right. So next slide. And then, so if you accidentally do click it, what do you do? It's kind of the same. It's a lot of the same stuff. Contact your MSP or internal IT department immediately and tell them what happened. Now, this is kind of a interesting piece that I've seen in some of my companies. A lot of times, and this is why, I don't know, if you're running a company, just make sure your employees know that this isn't going to get them in trouble if they did this, because you want them to report it. So I've seen companies where the employee won't report it because they're afraid they're going to something, you know, they might get fired or they're going to get in trouble for it, right? But you definitely don't want to make employees feel that way, because you want to know this happens. Because if they don't tell you that they clicked on these links or gave them credentials or installed some malware, if they don't tell you that they did that, then this stuff is just sitting there, and now the hacker has access to your network. So they have to tell you. You know, if you did click on this, make sure your antivirus and endpoint protection is up to date and scanning. This next piece is kind of interesting because we at Cloud9, when we have a customer reports that they've done this, they've clicked on something they shouldn't have. We use a tool called Huntress, and it looks for those persistent footholds I was talking about, where this software just sits there. And it's surprising. It's specifically designed to look for footholds, Huntress is. And so it's always surprising to me how often it finds persistent footholds on the machine, in which case normal anti-malware missed it. So we do this. If our customer ends up clicking on something, we will run this Huntress tool, which will look for those persistent footholds. Many times it does find them, which is somewhat scary, that because there are normal anti-malware missed it. So, and then next thing, depending on the extent of the potential compromise, consider triggering your incident response plan. So hopefully you've worked with your MSP or IT department to create an incident response plan. This is a plan that just defines, you know, what you're going to do in case of, in particular, larger compromise. I mean, you're probably not going to go to your incident response plan for a contained compromise that just affects one user. But if it's affecting the whole company, like this ransomware attack I was describing, where 200 machines were infected, then you're going to go to your incident response plan, and that's going to define who you're going to contact. You know, insurance, your lawyers, you know, who's, you know, how are you going to alert your customers and vendors. It's going to have the entire process of what happens, especially during a larger event. And that, you know, I know that we will help design those plans with our clients. So I know that that's something that everybody should be doing with their IT department or MSP. Last thing, if you do actually, you know, reset your passwords. If you're pretty sure you clicked on something you shouldn't have, or put your credentials into a form you shouldn't have, definitely reset your passwords, and then make sure that whatever you reset it to is not something you're using across multiple platforms. Make it unique to just that system that got compromised. All right, next slide.
All right, we've got another poll question just to you know, keep things light here. So when we were having our prep call, we were debating, is taco a sandwich? Has nothing to do with phishing emails. All right, well, 80% so far are saying no, taco is not a sandwich. So I don't know if we want to debate this. We're going to take 30 seconds to offer your thoughts. Dick and Trent.
Go ahead, Dick.
Oh, no, the only other option I've seen is it a hot dog or a taco? Sorry, sandwich, hot dog or a sandwich.
I personally do not think it's a sandwich for sure. A taco is is its own unique thing. That's what I'm going with.
I mean, right. The closest might be an open face sandwich.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, back to the presentation. Okay.
Yeah. So, okay. So yeah. So how do you, I guess the next thing, how do you prevent, or how do you try to prevent from being phished? And I mean, yeah, I would say there's no tool in the world, and I know this, running an MSP, we get the questions from clients all the time, and we provide an email security platform that sits on top of 365, and 365 is still, so we got basically there's two sets of filtering going on, still stuff will get through, right? And I often get the time, why did this get through, Well, I kind of gave the bulletproof vest analogy. That's one way to look at it. But really, this stuff is always there's no way to stop it. There's no way to 100% stop it. People in your organization are going to get phishing emails, and so once they get them, the best way to prevent something bad from happening is the training employees. And this is, every company, I know that here at Cloud9, if you're a client of ours, we provide a security training platform to all of our clients, and that's just part of every program we have. And we believe it's so important because, it trains the employees on what to look for. So, if you don't have a security training platform, you should definitely take a look at getting one. These are very inexpensive, and what they do is, they could become part of your HR process, where you enroll that. So when you hire somebody, you just enroll them into the platform. This becomes part of the HR process, and they take the training. They get their, when they pass, that goes to the HR person, that gets put in their file, and that they've done this. And you can have refresher courses and things like that. There's also these platforms will do dark web scanning. They'll go on the web and see if your credentials have been hacked before, and they'll alert you to that. They'll also do simulated phishing, and that's where it will send your company fake phishing emails, and you can see which employees click on them and which ones don't. That's super important. All that will give you insight into what your employees are doing, and who's maybe more likely than others to click on them, and maybe they need a little bit more refresher training, right? The next thing is, have some robust policies in place, a company handbook, and the company handbook should stress things like, hey, you got to have your security, your employee, you have to have your security training, you have to pass it. If you click on something, you should have to report it. It may set up other security limits, such as, websites you can go to, not go to. Having these things in one single place an employee can reference, that's really good. Having an incident response plan. Now, this is, as I kind of mentioned before, this is a very important piece, especially for, I know a lot of smaller, if you have 2 or 3, 4 employees in your organization, this is not something you've probably even ever thought about, having an incident response plan, but it's not bad even at that size. So, this will define how you handle in particular, a severe security incident. And, you can work with your MSP for it. A lot of times you can even work with your insurance company for it. But it should be tested, and you should disseminate it amongst management in particular. If you're, I think I mentioned this, if you're a client of Cloud9, we provide the security training platform for your staff, as well as the continuous threat training as well. So, and we kind of monitor that. So we get if we will make sure the system's working, make sure that the emails are actually getting delivered to your mailboxes, and we make sure it's working correctly all the time. Next slide. So, this is where, so talking about, besides the security train, there are some other, you guys are at this point probably very, very well familiar with there's the Alta best practices. There's a lot of cybersecurity frameworks in general that are coming down the pipeline. So Alta has their best practices. These are a list of things that you should do for your organization to bolster its cybersecurity beyond just the stuff I was just talking about around email security. There's all kinds of other aspects of security. And then there's other ones that are coming down the pipe. If you've noticed, there's breaches are more and more common in the news. Lawmakers are starting to notice that, and states and even at the federal level are starting to push more and more cybersecurity frameworks upon organizations and companies. And this one in particular can apply to some of you. It may not apply to all of you, but the FTC safeguards it does apply to financial services organizations, and if you do closings, this is probably definitely going to apply to you. And I'm just going to kind of let Dickon talk a little bit about it, but this is other things to do to just secure your organization in general. So, Dickon.
Yeah, there's a lot of different frameworks, and some of them are even coming from the insurance companies who are tired of paying out these policy claims when there's a security incident. A lot of these organizations are tired of the attacks and breaches, and they want to stop them happening. And one of the ways they're doing that is instituting these different frameworks that are usually industry specific. They usually cover very basic best practices, probably a lot of stuff you've already seen. As we understand it, if you touch a consumer's financial or finances or their financial situation, you have to follow FTC safeguards. I used to work for a debt collection agency for about 14 years, and we absolutely had to follow this, along with HIPAA for the medical industry, PCI for payment card industry. Even Department of Defense manufacturing has frameworks they have to follow as well. So we wanted to just very quickly just touch on some of the high level points of the FTC safeguards in case you're not familiar with them. FTC safeguards should be followed by anyone who touches a consumer's financial situation or their finances. And they break it into two categories, two levels, to make it a little bit easier for the smaller organizations to meet the bare minimum essentials of security best practices. So we've highlighted in red on the left and on the right here. So on the left, if you have under 5,000 consumers, there's a slew of requirements in the document, but we highlighted just a few of the high level ones. So you must have a documented security plan and policies in place, much like what Trent mentioned earlier. Having a plan on how to respond to these things, making sure it's documented and reflects reality. Many companies will go out and purchase a book of policies and then think that they've checked that box and they're good to go. If you go down that path, you have to read those policies and customize them to your business. And then you have to make sure they're disseminated and the employees are trained on them, which is where we get back to the phishing training and the human element. So it's important to have policies that are accurate, enforced, and disseminated along with your security plan. You are also required to designate a security officer. I believe this can be with your MSP if you have one. If not, it should be an individual within your IT department. And if that's not an option, it can be one of your C-level suites. If you're a very small organization, they just need someone who they can go to and say, tell me about your security. They want your security plan in its entirety to be inspected and tested on a regular basis. This is usually annually. We recommend all of our clients, this meets a lot of the framework requirements too, to do certain annual tasks. So PCI is going to have annual requirements, CMMC is, FTC safeguards. You want to inspect all those policies, review them, make sure they're still accurate, make sure they're still current, and they reflect your business and your operations. And then it should be tested. So again, touching on the incident response plan that Trent spoke about earlier, it's no good to have one that isn't tested. The example I like to give is when I started doing these at my last job, we created a tabletop exercise and we said, okay, the facility has burned down. What do we do? That's the scenario, go. And the first thing we said was, well, we need to get our incident response plan. We don't have it, it just burned down. And we ended the tabletop test within the first 30 seconds as a failure. So as a remediation item, we chose to start printing the current version of those plans and policies and disseminating them to the key stakeholders. And they would keep 2 copies, one at home and one at the office. That way, if the office burned down, we have a backup copy somewhere that tells us what to do. And during an incident, a significant incident, oftentimes it's overwhelming. It can be a little panic inducing. If you don't have a good partner to work with to help you respond to that, it can be very intimidating and you'll forget steps in your incident response plan. So it's very good to have it in writing and go, okay, this is what we need to do under this scenario. The next requirement that we thought was worth mentioning is MFA, that's multi-factor authentication. Of all those breaches we talked about that we address on a weekly basis, 90% of them can be solved by having correct and tested multi-factor or 2-factor authentication. Some of them are configured poorly. There are some ways to navigate around MFA. One particular method is spamming the request. So the attacker will send a request to the user saying, "Can I get in?" The user says no. Well, then the attacker does it again and again and again and again and again and again. And eventually the employee goes, "Geez, yes, just stop texting me." Well, they just bypass the MFA security and completely let them into the system. This is exactly why we're trying to put a lot of importance on training of the individual, understanding the phishing, understanding the MFA, understanding that they play a role in the company's security standing and your ability to do business. The last item I put on the left there was encryption at rest and encryption in transit. This is a pretty common requirement across all frameworks. It usually only applies to the particular data that that framework applies to. So PCI, it's going to be about credit cards. They don't care about bank accounts. They only care about credit cards. If you're in the medical industry with HIPAA compliance, it's going to be all around the medical records, the coding, the insurance claims, and so on. In the title industry, it's going to be anything financial, anything PHI or PII, personal identified information, that needs to be encrypted at rest, which means you usually have to do full disk encryption, something like BitLocker if you're using Microsoft. There are other tools that can achieve the same result. And encryption in transit. So that's usually going to be through a website through HTTPS. That's the most common way that things are encrypted in transit. If you're doing file transmissions, you can do email encryption, you can do SFTP, you can do password protected zips. There's a bunch of different options to achieve that. So those are some of the high level base requirements for FTC safeguards. If you are over 5,000 consumers, then there are 4 extra items that the government wants you to be doing. The first one is a risk assessment. A risk assessment can be very small. If you're a very small organization, maybe it's you and one other person or just yourself. The risk can be very quick to blast through, and you should really only do it about once a year, depending on your organization. But risks should be assessed on all elements, not just IT. This is risks to your business, risks to your ability to control your consumers' data and safeguard it. Common examples would be a fire, right? Your building burns down. I brought that up as an option that I was doing on a tabletop test. That's a very easy one to assign a risk level to, and then your risk assessment should then contain something about how to remediate or reduce that risk. You may have fire extinguishers. You make sure the fire extinguishers are inspected annually. You may have a sprinkler system. You make sure that's flushed and tested periodically. But it could also be we have a disgruntled employee. It could be somebody clicks a phishing email. It could be there's an earthquake. It could be somebody knocks on the door and threatens you with a knife, right? It could be any number of things that go into that risk assessment. And the larger an organization you are, the more people you might invite into that risk assessment discussion to brainstorm different types of risks. And then every year you'll build on that and it'll get better and better as you go along. The next requirement is continuous monitoring or pen tests and vulnerability scans. Now, we can say from experience that it is much, much cheaper to do the continuous monitoring option there. We just did a quote for a customer who has about 5 external IPs and 200 internal, so they're a pretty good sized company. Their pen test was coming in around $9,000 to $10,000. Continuous monitoring will be a fraction of that. It'll be because you have to put endpoint protection antivirus on your systems anyway. If you get one that can do the continuous monitoring, you hit 2 birds with 1 stone. The next requirement is written and tested incident response plan. Again, why we keep harping on about that. Making sure, like the risk assessment, that it is tested annually, even if it's just a tabletop test. There may be notification requirements in there. When I was working in the debt collection industry, we had to write in Visa and MasterCard. They want to be notified if you have a breach. There was some customer contracts that required us to notify the media or notify their legal department within a certain time frame. So if you have an incident, when you declare that incident, many frameworks will have a timeline, a ticking clock that takes effect after that point. You may have 48 hours to do this, 72 hours to notify this person. It should also contain things like letting your CEO know, letting your IT department know, letting your designated security officer know, so that they know to roll out the plans and start responding to this incident. Trent did touch on that some small incidents, you wouldn't trigger your incident response plan. We've started writing into our incident response plans a difference between a security incident and a security event. And it doesn't seem like there's much of a difference, but the event is very, very small, contained to a single individual. You close that particular issue, there's no breach, there's no point triggering a full incident response, which may have dollar values tied to it. If you call in an IT forensics company and you have them on retainer, you don't want to waste that money just because somebody forgot their password, right? So sometimes you'll carve out special language just for very small events like that. The last requirement, if you have over 5,000 consumers, is an annual report to your board of directors. Now, we understand that many people on here may be very small companies and you don't have a board of directors. I worked for a company with over 350 employees. We didn't have a board of directors. We had a board of advisors and we had a C-level executive team. But basically, it means any decision makers at the highest level of the organization should receive an annual report from a security perspective. This would be a list of all the events and incidents during the year, a list of new tools that you've rolled out. It should contain your risk assessment, the current version of your incident response plan, and it should also contain what items the security team or the designated officer thinks need more attention. I've even worked with some frameworks and clients that have explicitly required us to have a line item in our annual budget for security response. So some of these are requiring that you segment or assign a certain amount of your annual budget just to addressing these types of issues. There was a rule change to the FTC safeguards. It's back in October 2023, but I would still consider that relatively new. A lot of people don't know it. And they added a reporting element to the framework. So if you have a data breach or a security incident that affects 500 or more of your consumers, you are required to report that to the FTC. And that, I think there's a timeline on that. I don't know off the top of my head, but that's something that should also be in your incident response plan and under the notification section that says, okay, we have this much time. If it's over 500 consumers, we have to report to the FTC. And then you should also have the FTC's contact information there. Is it a phone call? Is it an email? Is it a snail mail? Dare I say a fax? Whatever that is, it should be in there and defined quite clearly. So that should be FTC safeguards from a very high level for anyone who has to follow it.
Thanks.
Next slide. Yeah. Oh, there we go.
All right, there we are. All right, thank you, Dick and Trent. We have some time for Q&A. So if you have questions for the speakers, submit them in the questions box. We have had a couple come in already.
Nice.
One from Michael. This was about attachments, and he was wondering if there's lower risk of opening an email attachment on a phone versus opening it on a computer.
I would say to some degree, yes. From the executable, so from an executable standpoint, yes, like it would be less likely, effectively almost impossible to install something onto the device from an email. So from that point, yes, but a lot of attachments are just links to go to something where you'll fill it out and give them your credentials. So I think from the persistent foothold standpoint, yes, but from the I harvested your credential standpoint, no. In fact, actually, and then from that standpoint, from the harvested credential standpoint, you're more likely to give them your credentials on a phone statistically than you are. So you might be trading. So I guess what I'm trying to say is you're kind of trading one for the other. You're more likely to give your credentials out on a phone than you are on a computer, but you're probably less likely to have an infection from an attachment.
I
if
would
that makes
also
sense.
add, it's a bit harder to do the link verification on the phone because
Yeah.
it's hard to mouse over the link. You end up just tapping it. So something to keep in mind.
Mhm.
And a question from Jimmy on, Trent, when you were talking about endpoint security, is Sophos endpoint security one of the 30% of tools that normally catches malware attachments? If not, I have a couple of suggestions that you're confident in.
I just I think most, I mean, we do utilize Sophos within our company just on some clients. They have different levels of it. That's an interesting thought. I've seen this escape, every malware, anti-malware solution. I've never seen an anti-malware solution yet that will get everything. And that's usually why we do a lot of times we'll layer on this other solution, Huntress, on top of it, because Huntress does look for the persistent footholds that is often missed by other solutions. It's specifically built for that. And that's all it really does, which is kind of interesting. So as far as Sophos is a good solution. I'd say it's as good as many others. I don't have any, but many of them miss things. So don't count. So here's the ultimate thing: is kind of like at least this is my viewpoint. I look at endpoint security like I look at email security. Things will get through your endpoint security and infect your machine for sure at some point. It is not going to stop everything. So you have to be kind of aware of what you click on. So that's still the educational. I still think there's an educational part there too. Like, what are you clicking? What are you installing? So there's that piece too. So I don't know if that answered the question. Kind of.
Yeah, no matter what tool you choose, I still think there are going to be ways to get through and have false positives and false negatives.
Mm-hmm.
And as Trent alluded to, as the AI and language skills get better, they're going to be more tailored to look more like a real email. And no matter what you do, some will get through. And that's where the training piece comes in.
And to go a little bit further on that, so when I said there's different levels of, just real quick, let me think it through this. This is what there's the human. So in the endpoint security world, and this goes to that continuous monitoring thing that's a requirement of FTC. So there's what they call it. We'll call it a SIM. It gathers logs and events that happen. So there's a human component to this that can really help with this. So with a lot of these solutions, you can overlay or turn on those features, which then generate logs of suspicious events that maybe the endpoint solution didn't catch, but it's transferring that data to a human team to look at. Now, these are more expensive solutions than just your typical endpoint security. Your typical endpoint security is AI driven. It's not going to a human being. It's just the software decides yes or no, it's good or bad. But what you get from some of this, what we call MDR, managed detection and response, that's where there's a human team behind it, and they will look at suspicious. So this will generate suspicious events. They'll look at suspicious events, review it, and that's a much more likely scenario to catch that type of stuff. So MDR, MDR is a newer term out there. I mean, it's not that newer, but they call it managed detection and response, and that's where there's a human team that reviews all the events that these software things generate, and then they're looking for the things that slip by, in essence.
And that's also why these frameworks require a security plan. One tool isn't going to solve all your problems. You've got to have your policies in place, your responses in place, your EDR in place, your SIM in place, and all these other crazy acronyms that everyone's tired of hearing.
Right.
There's a tool for all of it, and you can go crazy. We run with the philosophy that security is a seesaw. So we have usability on one side and security on the other. We can make the most secure system in the world and no one can use it. And we can make the easiest system to use in the world and everyone and their brothers getting in, including all the hackers. It's finding the sweet spot and the balance between tools and expense and user experience. And balancing that for your organization, I think, is key. And that's why these frameworks have annual reviews of all your plans and policies to make sure that you're doing that balancing act successfully.
Mhm.
Well, Dick, and speaking of the user experience, we've got a few comments that people love your voice and want to know where you're from.
I was born in England. I moved to the United States in 1997. So I've been here longer than I've been there. But that's where the accent is from. And thank you, everyone.
Well, there you go. You have some fans out there. Another question on attachments, and I think I know the non-tech expertise answer is, but Sharon wants to know, is there any harm in responding to an email with an attachment that you know is bogus? I mean, my answer is you don't want to respond. You should just inform your IT department, delete it. But you know, any additional thoughts there?
If you know it's coming from a reputable source, I would probably open a separate email and say, hey, I got this. Are you aware that this is happening on your account? Because some of the reports we get from our clients, they're saying, hey, our customers are telling us we're sending stuff we never sent. In a real world example, I can't give out the client's name, but an attacker got in through phishing. They were able to bypass MFA because it wasn't configured correctly. And they sat in the mailbox for weeks doing nothing so that they were undetected. And then they waited till that individual sent ACH information to one of their clients. Then they took that document, kept it all exact. It was an attachment like a Word document, kept it all the same, and then changed the ACH routing number and bank account number, and then started sending that to their clients. Mm-hmm. They successfully obtained $90,000 from their clients, and they didn't even know it was happening until the client said, hey, we paid this. Why are you still billing us? And that triggered their investigation, that triggered us to get involved. And then we had to instigate the incident response plans.
Yeah, I mean, if the criminals get a hold of your email account or your customer's email account, you know, they can be sending that hey, it's coming from my trusted source. We're okay.
And it's very, very soft touch attack. Like they weren't sending 10,000 emails as spam. They weren't trying to deploy ransomware. It was very light touch, and it went unnoticed for weeks and weeks until we were roped in and involved. We actually partnered with a IT forensics company in that case to come in and do a more thorough investigation through the logs. And because of the dollar values, I would assume they've reported that to the government, and I believe those go to the FBI. I'd need to check that, and that would do a more thorough investigation because I believe the money crossed state lines, so that makes it a federal case.
You mentioned ACH. Obviously, our industry deals with the wiring instructions, and you know, same scenarios. So
exactly. Yep.
I would say just real quick on the if you get an email that you know is bad, you should not respond to it in general. You do not want them to know there's a human at the end of that. You actually just want them to think that there's maybe nobody's there and the mailbox is just still existing, but nobody's there. If they know someone's there, they're going to, you know, they'll continue to send them. So if you reply, you know, trying to maybe make some snide remark back to them like good try or whatever, you know, that just emboldens them to just keep going. And so it's just better to just, you know, just ignore it and, you know, almost pretend like, hey, you know, you're no longer at the company, but the mailbox is still active. That's a better way. They'll just, you know, they won't be sending as much stuff your way.
And that's the engagement we warned about earlier on. It's just like getting spam text messages. If you respond, they know that number works. If you answer the call, they know the number's good. So they're going to keep trying because they know they've got success, they've got engagement. They just need to get the attack right. It's best to just ignore and block if you can.
Yeah. Don't do the snarky response. So
as much as you want to.
All right, we've got a few minutes to go before we conclude. We have a few questions on passwords. Craig once asked, how frequently should you change your password, and what should you change about it?
So I would go back to that seesaw. So most of our organizations, they do the minimum that a framework requires. So if you have to follow FTC, I don't remember if they have password requirements in that framework. I'd be surprised if they don't. Nearly all of them do. But that usually sets the cadence of password resets, and it also sets the complexity requirements. I've seen extreme ones that won't let you use the last 64 passwords, and they must be at least 16 digits and cannot be any English dictionary words. Very extreme requirements. But that goes back to that seesaw, that now you've made it so secure it's unusable. So people are going to write down their passwords. So by making it more secure, you've made it less secure because it's not usable anymore. So we found, or my opinion from my history is 30 days. You should change your password every 30 days at a minimum. Some frameworks will let you go to 60 and 90 days. But the longer you wait, if there's an issue or compromise, that's more time that attacker has to do damage. You kind of want to find that balance of usability and security. What works for your organization? I'd say 30 to 60 days. I'd rather pull it into 30. If you go much shorter, people are going to forget and write them down. As much as I also personally hate it, not allowing elements of your previous password is a good thing.
Yeah,
because a lot of the password complexity systems, if you just change one digit, that's enough to get it through. So if your password is password 1, and then you change it to password 2, and then next month password 3, the attackers know that. They have documented dictionaries of most used passwords. You can go download one right now if you wanted to. And they will just increment the password. It'll take them no time at all to write a little script and loop through and go through 600 passwords. Oh, okay, none of them worked. But if one did work, there's also a likelihood that you used that password on your bank account, your Amazon account, your Hulu account, all of those. And then it has a domino effect. So it's good to have different passwords for different systems, which again isn't very usable, which is why Trent suggested a password manager. I have a friend in the security industry. He doesn't know any of his passwords. He can't log into anything without his password manager. He doesn't even know what they are. They're usually 20 plus digits and randomly generated. And when I've seen some of them, he showed them to me, they're crazy. There's no way you could remember them. But he changes them periodically. They're complex. There's no dictionary words. They're stored in a password manager. So all he needs is one good password to his password manager, maybe some MFA wrapped around it too for additional security. And then that's how he gets into all of his systems.
Great explanation about that. And that kind of segues right to the last question, and we'll wrap up. Sharon asks, what happens if the password manager platform or system gets hacked? Don't they have to do all of your passwords?
Yeah.
In theory, yes. But the password management tools, and if they're cloud hosted companies, go to great lengths to make sure they're protected. To give an example, every MSP out there has a tool to store all the passwords to manage their client systems. Those are one-stop shops for every password of every organization managed by that MSP. That's an extremely high risk, and that should be on your risk assessment as extremely high. And then your risk assessment should then say, well, how do we mitigate that risk? Hopefully, that company has some security frameworks of their own they're following, and you can ask them for those. And you can say, give me an executive report that you are protecting our data. Give me some type of assurance or some documentation that you've been audited, you've been checked, you're encrypting, you're password protecting, you're doing all the necessary things to make sure that this is a reliable and safe product to use. If you're very scared, there are non-cloud ones that just sit on your PC. And they use very intense encryption algorithms, much more intense than what you would use on a website. if you want to get techie, I'm thinking AES 256 versus AES 496, right? It's exponentially much more complex. And that's stored locally, so you have control over it. It's yours. I have one that I store locally for my personal systems. That's just the way I've preferred to do it over the years. But we've never, I mean, Trent, keep me honest, I've never heard of a password manager getting compromised.
No, actually I believe, but I don't believe any passwords were exposed, but I do think that, who was it?
Oh.
LastPass might have been a couple years ago.
Okay.
But I don't think that any of the passwords were exposed. And I mean, that's where I was kind of gonna, they do, if they're doing it right, the password should be encrypted themselves so even if a hacker
Right.
gains access to it, they shouldn't have access to the passwords.
Encryption at rest.
Yes, but that's going just one. I do think that, let's just say that does happen. I actually think that that you would be notified, you could change all your passwords. That's still better than having the same password for everything. That's the very, there's nothing worse security wise than just having that one password you use for everything. So no matter what security risk there is to some password manager, it's still minuscule compared to that. So that's how I would view it, at least. Password manager has been, and I view it as like the essential tool, like that every person on the planet should have, because I know how human nature says you're going to use the same password for everything. And so the only way that I was able to get away from that was to use a password manager that did it all for me. And I know that worked for me. So if it worked for me, it's got to work for the rest of you. So, and it's, from my standpoint, I mean, I don't worry about, really anything getting compromised across the board like that. So, that I know so I view that every company should have a password manager, and they're so inexpensive, even from a corporate standpoint. And you could share, it allows the sharing of password between employees, things that, securely. And that's, that's important too. From a company standpoint, how do you guys share passwords between employees? That's, just walk over and tell that person and they tell 3 other people. It's like, you can securely share it without even showing them the password, which is kind of neat in a lot of these password managers.
All right, guys. Thanks for the great information on phishing, passwords, security. Hopefully, everyone's cyber hygiene was amped up a little bit after today's webinar. Just a reminder, if you missed parts of today's presentation, or if you think of others in your office would benefit from listening, a recording of the presentation will be available at alta.org/webinars, and you'll also get a link with a link to the recording tomorrow. I do need to thank Closing Lock once again for sponsoring today's webinar. And Trent and Dickon, thank you again for sharing your expertise.
Thanks for having us.
Cool.
All right, that brings us to the conclusion of today's webinar. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Awesome, thank you.
Do we stay on?